"You're just the wife," he said, standing in our kitchen like he was the king of Atlanta, and I was some maid who forgot my place. His tone slid through the air, smooth, practiced, dripping with the kind of arrogance that only grows when a man's been praised too long and corrected too little. The scent of his aftershave floated behind him, sharp and citrusy, clinging to the air like it had something to prove. His cufflinks caught the morning light, winking gold across the marble countertop. I didn't say a word. I just kept wiping the counter in slow, patient circles, one hand steady, the other holding back the storm that had been building in me for years. Because deep down, I knew something he didn't. I knew exactly who built the empire he loved to brag about. My name is Danielle Parker. I'm 47 years old, born and raised in Decatur, Georgia, and this is the story of how I learned that silence can be louder than revenge. When I first met Marcus, he wasn't the man with the imported suits and corner office swagger. He was a 26-year-old junior accountant with ambition bigger than his paycheck and a smile that could talk its way through a locked door. His watch was chipped, his car barely made it up hills, and his dreams were the only luxury he owned. Back then, I was the one with the map. A fresh MBA, 2 job offers, one from a Chicago firm that practically promised the moon. I had my mother's discipline in my blood, the kind that comes from working doubles at Grady Hospital and never missing Sunday service. I was organized, focused, efficient. But Marcus, he was charismatic. He talked about legacy, like it was oxygen, about ownership, freedom, and changing the numbers game for people who look like us. He'd lean across diner tables with that grin and say, "You and me, Danny, we could build something the world ain't ready for yet." And I'd believe him, because he said it like prophecy. When I look back now, I can still smell the coffee from that diner off Memorial Drive, hear the hum of the neon sign outside. I remember how his words wrapped around me like a promise I could touch. We married the next year. Small ceremony, courthouse downtown, nothing fancy. I wore a cream-colored dress from Macy's clearance rack, and he wore a borrowed suit. We signed papers with trembling hands and laughed all the way to Waffle House afterward. He ordered double hash browns. I ordered hope. I turned down Chicago, told myself we'd start our life together our way. He said us, so easily back then. Us sounded like partnership, like equality. And for a while it was. We built Parker & Associates from our dining table. Late nights, takeout containers stacked in the sink. He'd charm the clients. I'd handle the numbers, the filings, the tax law updates. I built the systems, coded the templates, color-coded the spreadsheets. He'd tell people, "My wife's got the brains. I just smile pretty." I thought that was love. I thought that was humility. But what it really was foreshadowing. When the firm started turning a profit, Marcus changed in quiet ways first. New shoes, sharper suits, a watch that actually worked. Then came the louder changes, the way he spoke over me in meetings, the way he started introducing me as the backbone of the household instead of the backbone of the company. I laughed it off the first few times, told myself it was pride, not possession. By the time our son Terrence turned 10, the company had moved into a sleek office near Buckhead. The phones rang nonstop, the parking lot stayed full, and Marcus started saying, "my company" instead of "our company." That's how it starts, the quiet erasure. I became the woman behind the curtain, the one making sure payroll hit on time, the one filing forms long after everyone went home. My name disappeared from the letterhead. But my fingerprints? They were everywhere. The first time I realized how invisible I'd become was at one of those business dinners. Mahogany table, overpriced wine, laughter that sounded rehearsed. 7 board members, 5 men, 2 women. They talked numbers, mergers, future growth. I stayed quiet, the good wife, until Marcus misquoted a data set I'd personally compiled. I corrected him, softly, respectfully. He waved his hand like I'd interrupted the grown folks. "Let the big kids handle this, babe," he said, smiling that polished smile. Then he added, loud enough for the table to hear, "You're just the wife." The laughter that followed was a slow echo, low, polite, poisonous. Even the women laughed, eyes darting toward me with that familiar mix of pity and relief. I smiled too, because that's what wives are taught to do: smile, save face, swallow pride. But inside, something stilled. I looked around that table, every single person there eating off plates I had once set. The logo on the business cards, the systems keeping their bonuses flowing, the retention model that Marcus couldn't even explain properly, all mine. And I sat there, invisible, polished, dismissed. When we got home that night, Marcus went straight to bed. I stayed in the car. The garage light buzzed above me, flickering like an old memory trying to come back. The air smelled of oil and quiet. I gripped the steering wheel until the leather left imprints on my palms. In that silence, I thought about my degree. Still framed, still perfect. Buried in the basement behind boxes of Terrence's old toys. I thought about my grandmother, who used to say, "Baby, you can't build a kingdom and then let a fool sit on the throne." And I realized I had built one, and I'd crowned him myself. I didn't cry. I don't cry for men who don't know what they're standing on. The next morning, I woke up before him, made coffee, folded laundry, quiet, deliberate. When he left for work, I went into the home office, dusted off the old filing cabinet, opened folders that hadn't seen daylight in years. There it was, the original incorporation form, his name first, mine second, not as co-founder, not anymore, but as initial signatory, dormant, buried, but still there. I remember sitting back in that chair, the sunlight cutting across the papers like revelation. My hands were shaking, but my heartbeat was steady. That was the morning I stopped being his wife and started being his silent partner again. For weeks after that, I studied him, watched him the way you watch an approaching storm, tracking patterns, reading the wind. I started showing up to company events again, quietly, elegantly, wearing the calmest smile in the room. People whispered, "Mrs. Parker's back." I let them whisper. I heard the rumors about Sydney, the new executive assistant, young, polished, curls too perfect to be accidental, no wedding ring, no hesitation when she laughed too hard at his jokes. I didn't need to confront. I'd already seen the expense reports, hotel charges coded as client meetings, gifts filed as business development. I didn't react. I recorded dates, receipts, transaction IDs. Each lie became a ledger entry. At home, Marcus grew careless, coming in late, reeking of perfume that cost more than my car insurance. "Networking," he'd say with a smirk. I'd just look at him and nod, because every time he said, "You're just the wife, Danielle," I'd feel my silence sharpen into something surgical. Silence, when used right, can slice deeper than any scream. Then came the gala. Harold Davis, the COO, sent the invitation himself, a charity dinner at the Marriott downtown. Marcus claimed he had a client dinner, so I went alone. The ballroom shimmered, gold chandeliers, a jazz trio soft in the corner, the kind of night built for pretending. Harold spotted me, smiled kindly. "Good to see you, Mrs. Parker. You still keeping Marcus in line?" I laughed lightly. "Some days," I said. He chuckled, rubbing his knees. "Can't keep doing these 12-hour days forever. When I retire, Marcus'll need someone steady beside him." I swirled my champagne. "Yes, he will." But my mind was somewhere else, on a clause I once helped Harold draft years ago. Back when the company was still nothing but 3 laptops and a manila folder. A clause buried deep inside the bylaws. It stated, in the event of a leadership vacancy or transition, any dormant shareholder with founding authorization could be temporarily appointed to act in an executive capacity by board majority vote. A mouthful, but a powerful one. And guess whose signature sat right next to Harold's on that document? Mine. That night, I drove home in silence. Marcus was sprawled on the couch, shoes still on, his phone face down beside him. A text lit the screen. "Miss you already." No name. Just those 3 words glowing like neon truth. I didn't touch it. I just watched him snore softly. mouth half open, and realized this man, this self-proclaimed king, was sleeping beside the very woman who held the keys to his kingdom. The next morning, I got up before dawn, made coffee again, same as always. The kitchen smelled like roasted beans and quiet resolve. Then I sat at the desk, opened my laptop, and drafted an email to an old friend from grad school, Lila Anderson, now a corporate attorney downtown. Subject line: reactivation inquiry. Just 3 words: clean, professional, dangerous. When I hit send, I didn't feel fear. I felt alignment. Because from that day forward, my silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. The day after I sent that email to Lila, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet, still carrying the faint warmth of the coffee I hadn't yet brewed. The city outside hadn't started moving yet. No car engines, no leaf blowers, no noise from the neighbors' dogs. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. That's the kind of silence that feels like a secret. I packed the folder carefully. Original bylaws sealed in a plastic sleeve. I slipped it into a brown UPS envelope and wrote Lila's address in clean, careful print. The weight of it in my hands felt heavier than paper. It was proof that the story Marcus told the world wasn't the full one. At the UPS store on Wesley Chapel Road, I stood in line behind a man shipping sneakers and a woman sending a box to her daughter at college. The clerk called, "Next!" and I stepped forward, sliding my envelope across the counter. "Certified mail," I said, my voice steady. "Keep a copy of the tracking, please." The printer hissed, spitting out the receipt. I folded it once, tucked it into my wallet, and smiled faintly to myself. One small motion, but everything had just shifted. The moment that envelope left my hands, the game changed. Lila didn't waste time. She never did. By the end of that same week, she had looped in a small legal team. All women, all black, all sharp as glass. They gathered in her downtown office, surrounded by glass walls and the smell of lemon oil and ambition. I sat at the end of the table, watching them spread the documents out like puzzle pieces. Their eyes moved quick, their pens clicked in unison, and when they spoke, it was music. Calm, precise, certain. They didn't ask the kind of questions men ask when they're trying to test your conviction. No, these women listened. They read. They nodded. They understood. Lila leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her folder. "Danielle, if this clause holds, and based on what I see, it will, your husband's company still operates under this same LLC framework. That means you're not just eligible to reactivate your board presence." She paused, watching my eyes. "You might also be entitled to a vote." That word echoed. A vote. Not just a voice in a meeting, not a polite courtesy. A vote. It landed in my chest like a key, turning in a door I didn't know I still had the right to open. My heart didn't race. It slowed. Because I knew, right then, I wasn't climbing back in through the window. I was walking through the front door of a house I built. That same week, Terrence came home from Howard University for spring break. My baby. Except he wasn't a baby anymore. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, cologne that smelled like cedar and independence. He carried his laptop everywhere, working on his finance projects even while the TV was on. Marcus used to say Terrence was just like his old man, but I saw something different. My son had his father's drive, yes, but his integrity? That was mine. One afternoon, while I was plating catfish and collard greens, he leaned against the counter and studied me. "You okay, Ma? You seem focused." I laughed softly, keeping my eyes on the skillet. "Just sorting some old files, baby." He raised an eyebrow, half smiling. "That doesn't sound like you mean taxes." "Maybe I'm just doing some cleaning," I said. He didn't press. That's the thing about sons who respect you. They don't have to know every battle you're fighting to believe you'll win it. And in that moment, I made myself a quiet promise. I wasn't just finishing this for me. I was finishing it for him. So he'd know what a woman does when the world underestimates her. so he'd never confuse silence with weakness again. By early April, the air smelled like rain and fresh-cut grass. I'd spent 3 weeks combing through old contacts, reaching out to the people who were there in the beginning, the ones Marcus thought had disappeared into retirement. The first was Gloria Jean Simmons, a retired attorney from Macon who still owned a 2% stake as a silent partner. She answered my call with that rich, knowing laugh. "Well, look who finally decided to call me," she said. "I was wondering when you'd come collect your flowers." The second was Wallace Freeman, a Vietnam vet turned consultant who now ran a chicken farm outside Augusta. He still had that gruff warmth in his voice. "Danielle Parker. Now that's a name I ain't heard in a minute." I explained what I was doing, what I found, what I planned. There was a pause. Then he said, "I always wondered why you stepped back. Didn't seem like you to stay in the background." "I had a family to raise," I said quietly, "but I'm back now." He chuckled, deep and full of life. "Well, all right then. Let's raise some hell." And just like that, the spark caught. The paperwork started moving fast after that. Gloria handled the legal confirmations from her end. Wallace connected me with old associates who still held small voting shares. Every signature, every phone call was another brick in the foundation of my return. And Harold, the outgoing COO, still respected me. He remembered the woman who helped him draft the company's ethics policy when nobody else had time. He still called me the quiet strategist. When I told him I wanted to reactivate my vote and be considered for the interim transition seat on the board, he didn't blink. He just said, "About damn time." Those words felt like validation wrapped in steel. Meanwhile, Marcus stayed wrapped up in his illusion of control. He strutted through the house in tailored suits, Bluetooth always in his ear, phone always buzzing. He'd grown soft in the ways that matter most, lazy with power, addicted to applause. He stopped thinking, stopped listening, stopped leading. I watched from the background as he showed up late to meetings, barked orders, and threw money at problems instead of solving them. The arrogance was eating him alive, and he couldn't even taste it. He didn't notice that I'd started showing up again at company functions, luncheons, and even a charity golf tournament he skipped. He didn't notice that I'd begun advising under Gloria's name on compliance policy. He didn't notice that people were beginning to talk, quietly, respectfully, about Mrs. Parker's return. That May, at a staff luncheon, I sat beside Angela, the woman who practically ran HR but got none of the glory. Mid-40s, precise, detail-oriented. She reminded me of myself 10 years ago, invisible but indispensable. By dessert, she leaned in and said quietly, "Mrs. Parker, I've got something you might want to see." She emailed me 3 files that afternoon: favoritism, misuse of company funds, and a quiet complaint from a junior employee, a woman. No lawsuit yet, but the cracks were showing. The foundation Marcus stood on was crumbling, and he didn't even know. One night, Marcus came home furious, slamming doors, loosening his tie like the house offended him. "They're threatening to bring in someone new," he growled. "Some washed-up consultant from Macon? What the hell does Gloria think she's doing?" I stirred the gumbo slow and steady, the aroma of sausage and cayenne filling the air. "Sounds like change might be coming." He glared at me. "You know something I don't?" I looked up from the pot, meeting his eyes. "I know plenty of things you forgot." He didn't like that. He stormed off, muttering about loyalty and ungrateful people. The door slammed so hard it rattled the dishes. When the echo faded, I just stood there. Steam rose from the gumbo, curling like ghosts. I thought about all the years I'd spent making meals in peace in this same kitchen, all the dreams I'd folded up neatly beside the dish rags. I whispered to myself, "You didn't waste your time, baby. You were planting." And I meant it. By June, everything was in motion. Harold officially filed his retirement. The board called an emergency vote for interim leadership. 3 names were on the list: 1 external consultant, 1 VP from New York, and mine. Marcus had no idea. He thought the list was confidential, and technically it was. But when your name is on the founding documents, they have to include you. Rules he never bothered to read now belong to me. The pre-vote reception was at the Four Seasons, all crystal chandeliers and quiet wealth. I wore a deep emerald suit, the same one from our 20th anniversary dinner. I hadn't worn it since that night, but it still fit like purpose. Angela spotted me near the entrance. "You look like power," she whispered. I smiled. That's because I remembered I had some. The words rolled off my tongue like scripture. Marcus arrived late, loud, laughing too hard. His tie was too bright, his cologne too heavy. He scanned the room, barely giving me a glance. He thought I was there as someone's assistant, maybe someone's date. He didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him anymore, and that, I realized, was his biggest mistake. Even Sydney, his former assistant, was gone now. Quietly transferred for HR reasons, he told people. The truth? He'd burned that bridge like every other one he'd crossed. He called her too emotional. I called it consequences. That night, in the quiet corner of the conference suite, I met with Wallace, Gloria, and Harold. The city lights spread beneath the window like gold veins. The air was heavy with anticipation and quiet victory. Gloria placed a sealed folder on the table between us. "You'll need to sign after the vote," she said, sliding it toward me. Inside was a single document. Appointment of Danielle Parker, Interim Chief Executive Officer. Effective immediately upon board majority approval. I read it once, then again. My reflection stared back at me in the glass of the window. Calm, grounded, unshaken. Harold grinned. "Told you, about damn time." My fingers brushed the paper, and for the first time in years, my name felt right where it belonged. On top. I didn't tremble. I didn't hesitate. I just said, "Let's get to work." I didn't hear from Marcus for 2 whole weeks after that meeting. Not a phone call, not a text, not even one of his petty, sarcastic one-liners that usually arrived when he was cornered. For Marcus, silence was never peace. It was plotting. It was pride dressing itself as strategy. But this time, I didn't flinch. Because while he was out there stewing in disbelief, I was at my office every morning at 8 a.m. sharp, heels clicking against the marble floors like punctuation marks. Each day began the same, coffee steaming beside the window, the Atlanta skyline washed in gold, a quiet reminder that the city doesn't stop for anyone's heartbreak. I rolled up my sleeves and started fixing the empire he'd nearly drowned in arrogance. The first order of business was the compliance department, the same one Marcus had gutted 2 years ago, calling it a waste of money. He never understood that accountability isn't an expense, it's insurance. Angela and I stayed late that night, surrounded by towers of paper and flickering monitors. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the room while she scrolled through 6 months of expense reports, color-coded like confessions. Between the steakhouse dinners, the luxury hotel client meetings in Charlotte, and a mysterious monthly transfer labeled SK Holdings LLC, Marcus had bled over $48,000 in company funds for personal pleasure. Angela whistled low. He didn't even try to hide it. "No," I said softly, highlighting each entry in yellow. "Men like him think the rules bend toward charm." I didn't confront him. I didn't slam doors or send texts laced with fury. I reported it to the board, to legal, to HR. Then I filed it all away neatly, every document labeled, time-stamped, and sealed like evidence in a courtroom I intended to win. Because I wasn't trying to destroy him. I was building something stronger, something that could stand without him. By the second week, the atmosphere at the firm had changed. I kept meetings short, the agenda clear, the tone precise. No grand speeches, no theatrics, just structure, just direction. "Here's where we are," I'd say, clicking through the slides. "Here's where we're going." The air in those rooms began to shift. I could feel it in the way people sat taller, in how interns started offering ideas instead of apologies. Even the veteran accountants, the ones Marcus had bullied into silence, started speaking again. A quiet culture shift, but one that smelled like respect. Angela caught me after one meeting, eyes bright. "Feels different around here," she said, "like the air's lighter." "Good," I replied. "That means we're healing." Meanwhile, at home, the silence had a different weight. Yes, we still lived under the same roof. I can hear the disbelief when I say it, but sometimes strategy looks like patience. Atlanta rent wasn't cheap, and I wasn't about to let emotions drag me into debt while legal strategy was already underway. So, we lived like ghosts, passing in daylight. He started coming home later and later, sometimes 1 a.m., sometimes not at all. When he did walk in, the smell hit first. Expensive vodka, cigarette smoke, and perfume that didn't belong to me. He'd mutter things under his breath in the kitchen. Power hungry, or don't forget who built that company. I never looked up. I'd sip my chamomile tea, check tomorrow's planner, and walk back to my room. Silence, steady as scripture. By the time July rolled in, the house was quiet in a way that didn't hurt anymore. The 4th came and went. No barbecue, no fireworks, just a long weekend filled with files, forms, and quiet resolve. I spent it reviewing reports while the sound of the cicadas rose through the open window. Somewhere down the street, kids were laughing over sparklers. I thought about the years I'd spent putting everyone else first, how I'd given up promotions, time, dreams, all for stability that turned out to be a cage. And then I thought, never again. On July 10th, I met Lila at her office again. Her space smelled like eucalyptus and fresh ink. She was smiling before I even sat down. "Danielle," she said, tapping a stack of documents, "you're in a rare position. The ethics committee is willing to settle if you remove Marcus from the company entirely. Clean break, severance package negotiated. You'd have full control, permanently." I let her words settle. They felt both heavy and holy. "What about his shares?" I asked quietly. "They're joint marital property," she replied, "until the divorce is finalized." That single sentence rearranged the room. For the first time, the word divorce didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a clearance sale on dead weight. The next morning, I filed the papers. Quietly. No scene, no announcement, just a USPS certified envelope with a cover letter that read, "See attached documentation. Danielle Parker." It landed on his office desk by noon. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindictive. I was surgical. That night, he didn't come home. Not the next either. When he finally walked in, 2 days later, the air changed before he even spoke. The front door slammed. His shoes hit the tile heavy and fast. I was in the kitchen, reading over the quarterly reports. He slapped the envelope on the counter so hard the pages bent. "Is this a joke?" he demanded. I looked up, calm as water. "No, it's overdue." For a moment he just stared, like the walls had moved without his permission. He said, "You really think you can do this without me?" I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "I already am." He blinked, stunned by the simplicity of it. For once, words failed him. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He just stood there, eyes darting between me and the papers like he was seeing a stranger. And maybe he was. Because the woman he thought he married, the one who bit her tongue, played peacekeeper, and swallowed her brilliance, she'd been gone for a long, long time. He finally exhaled. "You'll regret this," he muttered, voice brittle. "No," I said softly. "You will." He grabbed his keys, his jacket, and whatever pride he could scrape off the floor. And just like that, Marcus walked out of our house for the last time. No threats, no apologies, no tears, just the sound of a man walking away from a throne he never earned. A week later, I stood before the staff in the conference room. The morning sun poured through the windows, catching the glint of the company's logo behind me. My palms rested on the table, steady, centered, calm. As of today, I said, the leadership transition is complete. Parker and Associates will continue under new direction, one that prioritizes integrity, transparency, and accountability. There were murmurs, a few raised brows, but no pushback. They had watched me rebuild from ashes, watched me walk in every morning without anger or excuses. And when people have seen you weather storms and still show up with grace, they trust you. Angela clapped first, then Wallace, then the rest followed. The sound wasn't loud, it was respectful, affirming. By August, everything was finalized. The divorce, the board paperwork, the settlement. Marcus accepted the severance without a fight. The arrogance was gone now, replaced by the hollow look of a man who realized too late that he'd mistaken his wife's silence for weakness. He packed what was left of his ego and disappeared into whatever corner of Atlanta still believed his stories. I kept the house, the company, and most importantly, my name. Now, when I walk through those office halls, there's a stillness that feels earned. The hum of conversation, the quiet clicking of keyboards, the faint aroma of fresh coffee, all of it humming with new rhythm, no fear, no tension, just focus. I didn't have to scream to reclaim my life. I didn't have to burn the building down, because silence, when guided by strategy, doesn't whisper. It commands. By September, the air had started to shift. That heavy southern heat finally began to loosen its grip, slipping off the city like an old coat. Mornings came cooler now, soft breezes pushing through cracked windows, carrying the smell of dew and magnolia. Cicadas still hummed, but their song was slower, tired. And with that change in weather came something else. The slow, certain closing of chapters, clean ones. The divorce was finalized the second week of the month. No mediation, no lawyers circling like vultures, no shouting matches over furniture or bank accounts, just a single signature. Marcus signed in silence. I didn't go. I didn't need to. Lila texted me that afternoon. It's done. He didn't say a word. I stared at that message for a long moment. Then I placed my phone face down, exhaled once, and let it go. No celebration, no tears, just release. Because by that point, I was already 3 steps into my new future. The company was stable again. Not perfect. Stability never is. But steady, grounded. The panic that used to hang in the air like smoke was gone. The phone still rang, the printers still jammed, but the energy had changed. People laughed in the break room now. Not nervous laughter, real laughter. The kind that fills space and makes the walls feel alive again. Emails didn't start with urgent anymore. The interns no longer walked on eggshells. Meetings ran on time. People showed up early, not because they feared Marcus's wrath, but because they cared about the work again. Angela, bless her, had turned into the quiet backbone of the whole operation. She'd walk past my office with her tablet, give me a nod that said, "We got this." And we did. One afternoon, Gloria stopped by my office. She leaned on the door frame, the smell of her peppermint gum filling the air. Her hair was wrapped in a bold red scarf, and her eyes sparkled with that seasoned kind of wisdom only Black Southern women carry. She held the quarterly reports in one hand and said, "Danielle, this feels different. This feels like home again." I smiled, setting my pen down. "It does, doesn't it?" She stepped inside, looked around at the plants I'd added near the window, the fiddle leaf fig that was finally growing new leaves, and nodded. "See, baby," she said, "you didn't just rebuild a company. You restored its soul." Her words hit deep, because that was the truth. It didn't feel like conquest. It felt like peace, real peace, the kind that hums under your skin, quiet but alive. Not because I'd taken over, but because I'd finally stepped into the space I was always meant to own. Ownership, I'd learned, isn't about ego. It isn't about who gets their name on the door or whose signature shines on a contract. It's about stewardship, about protecting something, people, principles, legacy, with care and discipline. Marcus never understood that. He thought being the boss meant being loud, being feared, being the first one to speak in every meeting. But the real bosses? The ones who last? They're the ones who listen, who carry the weight quietly, who make the hard calls without making a scene, who lift others up while keeping both feet on the ground. When the new signage went up, CEO Danielle Parker, I stood in the parking lot early that morning just to see it under the rising sun. The letters gleamed silver against the brick wall, the same spot where Marcus once stood, bragging to investors about his company. I ran my fingers over the smooth edge of the plaque. For years, I'd imagined that moment would feel like victory. Fireworks, vindication, fanfare, but it didn't. It felt like stillness, like a long exhale after holding your breath for too many years. Peace, not pride. A month later, on a quiet Sunday, I found myself standing in the same kitchen where Marcus had once looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're just the wife." The same marble countertop, the same espresso machine, even the same ceramic mug I used to hold back my temper with. But everything felt different. The light looked softer now. The air smelled like maple syrup and cinnamon instead of cologne and tension. I made pancakes that morning, the way Terrence liked them when he was little, fluffy with extra butter and vanilla. Just because. No reason. No occasion. The sizzle of batter on the griddle filled the silence in a way that didn't hurt anymore. I poured coffee, sat at the kitchen island, and watched the sun rise slow through the blinds, painting golden stripes across the floor. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. That was freedom. It hit me then, sitting in that chair with coffee warming my hands. How full circle life can be. How a woman can pour herself out for everyone else, her husband, her child, her dream, and somehow still find her way back to herself. When she finally decides to stop apologizing for her strength, she doesn't just rebuild what was broken. She redefines what it means to stand. A few days later, I saw Marcus again. Of all places, it was at the Publix on Candler Road. I was in the produce section, humming to the background music, checking peaches like my mama taught me, not too soft, not too firm, just right. And there he was, same man, different light. He looked ordinary. Not ragged, not ruined, just dulled, like someone had turned down his brightness. The sharp edges were gone. The designer watch was missing. The shine was replaced with something quieter. He spotted me first, paused, then nodded. "Danielle," I nodded back. "Marcus." The air between us was strange, not heavy, not angry, just empty in a peaceful kind of way. He adjusted his grocery basket, eyes flicking toward the floor. "You always were smarter than me." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not true." He frowned, confused. "No?" I smiled, soft but certain. I just stayed smart while pretending not to be. For a heartbeat, the world went still. He blinked, then nodded slowly like he finally saw it. Not the insult, not the competition, but the truth. He didn't try to joke, didn't try to charm. He just said quietly, "Take care of yourself." "I already am," I said. He gave one last nod and walked away. No bitterness, no second glances. Just two people who once built a life together, passing each other in the fruit aisle of a grocery store. I turned back to the peaches, picked two, held them in my hands. They were soft, ripe, fragrant. And I thought about everything that word meant. Ripe. How life doesn't bloom on your schedule. How healing doesn't announce itself. It just ripens. Quietly, naturally. Sometimes it doesn't make a sound. Sometimes it just tastes sweeter. That afternoon, I drove home with the windows down, music low, sunlight flickering through the trees. My wedding ring was gone, replaced by a slim gold band I'd bought for myself, engraved inside with one word, enough. Because I was, more than enough. The company thrived. My son was grown. My peace was intact. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't surviving anyone. I was living for me. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.